Welcome back. This is the Weekend Report. I'm Masachaba Mposwa. Announcing the matric results this year, Basic Education Minister Siviwe Gwahube said the class of 2020 recorded the country's highest ever national senior certificate pass rate of 88%, up from 87.3% the preceding year. She said while this is a victory, there are still some challenges in the education system, causing a continuous dropout rate. Now, the Zero-Dropout campaign has found that about 40% of learners who start school in grade 1 will exit the schooling system before finishing matric, with boys making up the majority of them. Let's discuss this now with communications lead for the Zero-Dropout campaign, Colin Wardle. Good morning. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika. Colin, your 2024 national survey reveals that some troubling findings about why South African learners are leaving school. And before we get into the details, can you give us just a sense of the scale of this dropout crisis?
Yes, good morning to you and your viewers, and thank you very much for having me and platforming this issue. As you so accurately pointed out, it is currently estimated that of the learners in South Africa who begin grade 1, 4 out of 10 will not essentially proceed all the way to matric during their education journey. And with that, essentially, as you've also pointed out, disproportionately, some would say that young boys are affected most by this phenomenon. And we particularly find that from grades 1 to grade 9, there is a high retention rate within our schooling system. And the Minister of Basic Education earlier this week had alluded it to being close to 80%. But once you get from grade 10 to 12, you start to see that retention rate decline quite severely and eventually average out to that unfortunate 4 in 10 statistic.
Is there any information, have you done any surveys around why boys in particular are susceptible to dropping out of school?
Yes. 2 years ago, we conducted a research publication entitled Gender Matters, which is also available via our website, where we particularly looked at the differences learners experience going through the schooling system as both boys and girls. And something that the Minister of Education also alluded to earlier this week is that there have been certain interventions, for instance, such as addressing the teen pregnancy crisis, that have essentially supported young girls when dealing with issues that would typically push them or pull them out of the classroom. And similarly, boys, I think it is necessary for us to also start looking at interventions from a more gendered perspective, because what we do find is that boys, particularly when they reach adolescence, so when you get to that grade 9, grade 10 risk area for dropout, become more susceptible to antisocial behavior, whether that is, either bullying as being a bully or receiving bullying in school, sometimes gangsterism, but they're also called on quite often in a South African context to take on more responsibilities and within the household, particularly economic ones. So having to essentially go out into the world and find work prematurely to be able to support siblings or even extended family members. So there are differing pressures we find between girls and boys going through the education system. And so it's crucial for that reason for us to develop interventions that speak to kind of both of those gendered experiences.
Sure, and I'd love to engage you on those interventions. But now, Colin, your national survey found that dropout is really sudden. What are the earliest warning signs that a learner is disengaging?
So one of the things that we have found is that you can essentially track the behavior of learners. And one of the things we've advocated for are early warning systems. So making sure that within classrooms, not just the grades or pass rates are being tracked, but also issues such as attendance as well as behavior. And in instances where learners are struggling, either providing them with catch-up support for academic issues and psychosocial support for socio-emotional issues that they may be experiencing within the classrooms themselves. Another thing that essentially can also be done to make learners more resilient is ensuring that at home, or within their community, there's someone who's playing an active role in their education. So making sure that they're attending school, as well as essentially completing things such as homework. We found that that dramatically increases the likelihood of a learner staying engaged and completing school. And lastly, on that topic, something that also the minister confirmed during her briefing earlier this week is that particularly for boys, we have seen a great deal of grade repetition taking place, and a big consequence essentially of that grade repetition being discouragement for learners, and when they're feeling too old for a grade, particularly for boys again in this instance, that being something that kind of pushes them out of the classroom, as there is still a great deal of stigma attached to having to repeat a grade, particularly when a learner is older.
Sure. Now, Colin, are teachers adequately trained to identify emotional distress and disengagement and these early warning signs, or are they expected to just teach and move on?
So something I will definitely, I suppose, give credit to teachers in SA as well as the Department of Basic Education. We've been working with the DBE over the past few years, developing its psychosocial support policy. And with that, essentially, there has certainly been a fair amount of attempts to essentially train and upskill teachers in that. But again, teachers are already dealing with a lot on their plate. They are in overcrowded classrooms, teaching multiple subjects. So there's really the resources or opportunities to kind of pay learners the individual support. So something we've also advocated for a long time is stronger collaboration with other departments, such as the Department of Social Development, in being able to bring in those resources such as counseling and therapy by trained professionals for those explicit purposes to alleviate kind of the pressure or burden on teachers.
Now, the campaign estimates that 4 in 10 learners who start grade 1 will not complete matric or an alternative qualification. Now, is South Africa normalizing this failure?
Yes, so something that is of concern for us is that the retention rate for the class of 2025 remained unchanged at 64%. And it seems while the Department of Basic Education has kind of been able to at least stop the increase in the dropout rate, there definitely needs to be more intensive effort to essentially reverse this trend and finally essentially work towards getting to the department's own target of only having 2 in 10 learners dropping out. So we are definitely looking forward to working with the Minister of Basic Education, as both her as well as her DG indicated that they are going to be prioritizing dropout going forward from this year. And so we're looking really forward to the opportunity to collaborate with them and share the research and insights that we have been able to produce.
Now, Basic Education Minister Siviwe Gwahube has said that there's a direct link to learners' performance who were on social grants and those who were kicked off after they were 18 years old. Now, is there also a direct link with social welfare and the impact on dropouts, and how should this be dealt with?
Yes. So something we found with our research that we did in 2024, when looking at other international examples, how dropout has been reduced in similarly developing countries, we found that essentially financial support is one of the greatest interventions that can be done for learners. So I think a popular misconception in South Africa is the notion that, well, for quintile 1 to 3 schools, those are fee-free. So what is stopping learners from actually going to school and completing? But we often take for granted that there are issues regarding accessibility. So is there even a school within those particular communities to serve learners, particularly high schools? And other issues such as financial responsibilities, so having to purchase uniforms and essentially nutrition, and sometimes having to pay for additional programs. So being able to essentially provide learners with grants to support them as they continue through their education, and particularly even their families, makes a tremendous difference in the possibility or the likelihood of someone completing their school. And of course, that also takes off the pressure from older learners from having to then perhaps abandon their education earlier to go seek economic opportunities so that they can support either themselves or their families.
Sure. And on that note, Should there be accountability measures for learners and schools for these high dropout rates?
Yes. So one of the things, again, as we have been advocating, is the introduction of early warning systems. And we think with that, essentially, instead of having to put in, I suppose, systems that would be more punitive and punishing of schools and educators for kind of dropout rates, early warning systems work in a much more preventative manner. Because another thing that we found, and both in our local as well as international research, is that once a learner has left the classroom, it is far more difficult to get them back in than it would have been to essentially implement preventive interventions, whether that would have been academic or psychosocial support. So our advocacy is largely based around providing interventions that are happening before learners drop out, as opposed to punitive ones for after that takes place.
Sure. Now, as zero dropout, you've said that bullying and harassment are more significant factors than drugs or crime. Why are these issues still so prevalent inside classrooms?
So I think something to take into consideration and that our research found is that schools, unfortunately, while excuse me, while they often operate as a great site of services for a lot of, and safety for a lot of learners in the country, they are also not immune to what is happening in their broader communities. So you find that in communities where there is a prevalence of violence, of substance abuse, of gangsterism and other social issues, those eventually do put pressures within schools, and essentially the experiences that learners have outside of the classroom end up manifesting in different ways, such as bullying and harassment in the classrooms themselves. And with that, I think also something that when engaging with a lot of our partners across the country last year, that we've seen an uptick in is the increase of cyberbullying in particular, which is also a lot more difficult for schools to address because it ends up being this gray space where the bullying itself is not physically happening on school premises, but of course it involves certain learners and then sometimes learners from different schools. So essentially being able to address this kind of antisocial behavior, particularly online, as an increase is posing a new and significant challenge to the well-being of some learners in South Africa.
Now, before we let you go, Colin, what is the one intervention that, if implemented tomorrow, would have the biggest immediate impact on reducing South Africa's school dropout rate?
One, I think the first that we've advocated for quite some time, and I've mentioned before, would be the implementation of early warning systems. Second to that, the expansion of psychosocial support services for both learners as well as educators. And lastly, the continuing, I suppose, development and implementation for catch-up programs for learners who have fallen behind through grade repetition or through absence. Those three are essentially been key advocacy pillars for us, and ones that we believe would make a tremendous impact in reversing the dropout trends in South Africa.
Colin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and have a great weekend.
You too. That was communications lead for the Zero Dropout campaign, Colin Wardle.